Welcome back to the Sporting Eyes show for the 17th of February. I hope everyone's doing well. The football is finally back. We had a couple practice games, which I'll get to. We'll talk about the illicit drugs policy the AFL has proposed to the Players Association, have a look at four of the best, and then finish off with the number one pick from last season's draft. But we're going to start with the pre-season games now. The Bulldog and Essendon one wasn't a great watch overall, a little bit sloppy. Not really helped by the weather at the Whitten Oval. Both sides were missing key personnel, played a lot of young players, so not too much to take away from the first practice game. But the second one, the Indigenous All Stars against Fremantle, I thought it was fantastic, and that's where I'm going to start. 43-point win, a lot of flair, high transition game, not a lot of stoppages, and it was pretty exciting. Now going into the game, I wasn't quite sure what we'd see. Obviously it's an obscure team, a pretty small team full of some of the best forward half players in the competition against Fremantle, who's a real AFL team. So I wasn't quite sure how it would structurally work out. But my big takeaway is that this is something that should stay every year, or at least every second year, whether it's against Fremantle in the West, or maybe rotate it with West Coast, or take it to different states like South Australia and perhaps Queensland one year as well. To the Indigenous All Stars credit, they played really physical and they came to play. And I think that was the big takeaway from watching the game. From the first centre bounce, you could tell that they were on. They weren't treating it as an exhibition match. They were treating it more as a practice game. Again, going into it, I thought it might be high scoring, both sides, hitting 100 plus points. But it was far from that. The All Stars defended well. And Fremantle were pretty vanilla. That was the word used by Justin Longmuir. They didn't reveal too much. Played a lot of younger players in the second half. So not too much to take away from Fremantle. But when you have 38,000 people there, that does a lot of good for the community. It shows that the appetite is strong for the game. So I think this is something to build on. Obviously, it's the first time we've seen it in 10 years. And I think if you can build it over a 10-year period, it's only good. It does a lot of great things for the Indigenous community. We know that the numbers playing AFL have dropped, and it's not a good thing. Because how can you not like watching guys like Paul Francis play? Jai Simpkin got best on ground. Rankin, Pickett, Bolton, Bobby Hill. These are some of the best players in the competition. And the more we see, I think that the better it is for the competition. So that was my big takeaway. And besides the game, is this is something to build on. The appetite was there, and hopefully the AFL can continue it on for the next decade. Moving on to a bit more of a serious topic, which is the illicit drugs policy. This was revealed by Caroline Wilson in The Age, that the AFL has proposed new changes to their illicit drugs policy. Overall, it includes year-round hair testing. Currently, it's just a mid-year test, and then at the off-season period, instant fine and no more loophole to get out, which I'll get to after. So in the new proposal, the first strike will be a straight up $5,000 fine. As of right now, it's a $5,000 suspended fine, which means you don't have to pay it unless you get caught again. But that won't be the case in this new proposal. And the big switch up is with the second strike. If you get a second drug policy strike, you'll get suspended and you'll be named. So that's a big change. It's something the AFLPA is not happy about. And the other thing is the loophole, which I did not know, but the loophole is not to do with the doctors, which we heard about last year, and faking injuries. But if you go to the club and admit that you've been taking drugs, you don't get a strike essentially the first time. You can do that once in your career. That won't be present anymore, which I think makes sense. So with the things I've just listed there, they all make sense to me. I think they're all a good deterrence. And you still give that one warning to the player. I'm not a big fan of naming and shaming straight away. You give them a chance, they pay a hefty $5,000 fine, and then from then on, you obviously get suspended and named, which I think's fair. And I think most of us think's fair, but it's not, according to the AFLPA. Paul Marsh, who's the representative of the Players Association, wasn't happy with it, which is not all that surprising. His big point was obviously with player welfare, with mental health, that naming and shaming is not the right approach. Again, this is something the AFLPA has been on for a while, and that was no surprise. But I did find something interesting, a bit of a different viewpoint from each of the sides. The AFL, with these new policies in place, said they think there'll be less positives because obviously the deterrents for taking drugs are now higher, obviously with naming and shaming being the big one. But the AFLPA, some players spoke to the Age and said they think there'll be more positive tests because obviously the striking system is more harsh, and with the hair testing being far more regular, that more players will get caught. So that's pretty strange. It's almost a little bit disturbing in a way. We know there's some form of a drug issue in the AFL. It's not clear how strong it is. If you go on the internet, then apparently every AFL player is on drugs, which I'm sure is not the case, but I'm sure there's a certain sector, perhaps in each club or with a certain amount of the players that do take drugs regularly and can get away with it. Obviously, most famously, Ben Cousins, who we all know had big drug problems, never tested positive once and never got a strike. And the other example to use is Joel Smith, who got caught with cocaine in his system by Sports Integrity Australia, and obviously has been banned and now delisted from Melbourne. And my big point away with the strike system is you'd rather get caught by the AFL in the strike system and get that warning, even the second strike getting named and shamed, than getting caught by a much bigger agency like the Sport Integrity Australia or WADA or any of them, where you'll basically get banned straight away. So that's my viewpoint. I like that the policy is a lot harsher. I think overall, for the picture of the player welfare, it's actually better, far bigger deterrent. But again, the AFLPA has kind of been funny with this. They really want to protect the players' identities with these drug problems. I don't think it'll be easy to sway them to go onto the AFL side. But with that out of the way, we're going to have another go at 4 of the best and have a look at the win over under totals for 4 other teams in the AFL. Time for 4 of the best. I did this about a couple weeks ago with 4 AFL clubs, and I'm going to do it with 4 other ones. So the way this works is pretty simple. I'll take the win over under for 4 clubs and say if they go over that or under it and give you a reason. First one is St Kilda, and I'm going to say they go under 9.5 wins. Now Ross Lyon, if there's a coach that can get the best out of a group, it's him. But even in their current situation, I'm not sure he'll be able to get a whole lot of wins, especially in the first half of the season with their injuries. You know, Rowan Marshall's had problems. Jack Sinclair has had a small hamstring. Max King seems healthy. He hasn't done an ACL, but it's not clear how bad his knee is. Throw in Philippou, Paddy Dow. They've had a range of injuries. There hasn't seemed to be much continuity in their pre-season. And although they have had some improvement, like Darcy Wilson, who's been really good this pre-season, I'm not sure that there's a whole bunch of growth. Mitch Owens is still stationed forward of the ball. Don't know about Cooper Sharman next to Max King, how that combination will work. So a lot of unknowns with St Kilda at this stage. Pair that with a lot of injuries. Not much, obviously, high-grade midfield talent besides Steele and McRae. I'm going to say they don't win many games early in the season. I think they can become a good team in the back half of the year. That's the main reasons why I've got them going under 9.5 wins. Now the other side is Port Adelaide, who I've got going under 13.5 wins, but right on the margin. I'm talking 12 or 13 wins. The reason I think Port Adelaide can still be good is because of Horn Francis, Butters and Rosie. I think those 3 are formidable, really hard to stop when they're on, and they're going to win them a lot of games, especially at home. But I'm not sure about the pieces surrounding them. You lose Dan Houston, who's obviously a back-to-back All-Australian defender, really helps with their ball movement. You can put Jace Burgoyne back there. Kane Farrell were both pretty good options, but none of them are the quality of Dan Houston. And I'm definitely not sold on their forward line. Todd Marshall was obviously out for the year. He's okay. He kind of comes and goes a little bit. But I definitely don't trust Jack Lukosius, Mitch Georgiadis, and then Joe Berry and Joe Richards, who are going to be 4 new players in their forward line. It's going to be a unique one. No more power forward in Charlie Dixon. It's going to be far more mobile, a little more unpredictable. But again, I'm not totally buying that because I don't trust all of those players at this stage of the year. But with that triple threat in the midfield, I still think Port Adelaide will push finals, 12-13 wins, but I've got them going under 13.5. And I don't think the coaching handover will be a massive difference. That's not the reason I've got them going under 13.5 wins. Richmond, I've got them going over 2.5 wins, mainly because I think it's pretty hard to win less than 3 games right now. They were pretty harshly judged on, I thought, last year. They had a lot of injuries, and if they can get on the park, Prestia, Taranto and Hopper in the midfield and Nankervis, that's still a pretty solid and experienced midfield group. You throw in Tom Lynch forward of the ball. We've got some stability in defence. Obviously Noah Bolter hopefully will get back after his suspension and behave himself. Hopefully you can pair him with Josh Gibkiss when he can recover from his ACL. And then throw in the bits of talent they have. Maybe Sam Lalor can have a big game here and there. But overall, I think they'll be a much healthier entering the season. Perhaps Adam Uze will have a bit more confidence to install his game style in this group. And I think they should be able to get over 2.5 wins because of that. And to finish off, I've got Melbourne going over 11.5 wins. And this is like Port Adelaide. I'm talking maybe 12 or 13 wins just going over. And similar reasons to why Richmond should go over. They're just going to be healthier. I think Jake Lever and Stephen May will be better. They'll be a better fit together than we've seen last season. Oliver will be better. I don't think he'll be All-Australian and best and fairest level Oliver. But I still think he'll be pretty good. And then the big one is Christian Petrarca. Pair him with Ed Langdon on ball and Trent Rivers. It's a new midfield. It's dynamic. You still have the best ruckman in the competition. And perhaps Van Rooyen can explode, be a little bit better this season, and you still have Keziah Pickett as one of the better small forwards and Bailey Fritsch. It's a pretty senior team. There's a lot of talent there. I think they'll be more stable across the board, a lot healthier than they were last year, and I think it'll be a bit more positivity around Melbourne. Will they bounce back and be kind of top 4, top 2? I'm not so sure, but just on the basis of their health, I think they'll have above 11.5 wins this season. Next up, we're going to talk about one of West Coast star midfielders and his passion for the game. A couple comments from Tim Kelly was big news in Western Australia and especially with West Coast fans. Now I'm going to read them straight so there's no misinterpretation here, and we're going to have a discussion about them. He said, "To be honest, for me, it's about honing in on what I've got to do, get my body right. My love of the game hasn't been great over the last couple years. There's a lot of contract talk and this and that, but I'm just trying to love the game again, and hopefully that comes." So that sets the tone of Tim Kelly going into 2025. Now, if you don't know, he's out of contract. He signed that big 6-year deal worth roughly $800,000 a year when he joined the Eagles from Geelong. And that expires this year, and it's a pretty important year for him because we don't know what his future is going to be like. Now, from the outside looking in, the Tim Kelly deal that West Coast traded 2 first-round picks and essentially 2 second-round picks for Tim Kelly. They did get some picks back, but that was the big blow for West Coast. And I'm not going to blame Tim Kelly for his time at the Eagles, which obviously hasn't been successful at all. You got to blame. I put majority of the blame on the list management group who misread their own list, paid way too much for Kelly, and then obviously they didn't have a lot of great young players around him. So when the senior guys left, they were left with the results they had. I think Tim Kelly's been a little bit better than what people give him credit for. The least amount of games he's played in a season is just 17. That was in 2022, and he's played about 80 to 90% of the games for West Coast, although it doesn't feel like that. Has his impact been phenomenal? Not really. He was better in his 2 seasons at Geelong. But in 2023, he did have a career-high player rating, and his lowest averages for a season at West Coast are 23.9 disposals per game, 5.3 clearances. That's the worst seasons he's had, his minimum total averages. So that's not too bad. And he's had a couple peak years again in 2023. Although West Coast really struggled, he had his career best numbers. But the big difference is the goal kicking. Now we know at Geelong they had a pretty loaded midfield. They still had Joel Selwood at that time, Dangerfield, Duncan, Guthrie, these guys were all up and running. And I went back and I was a bit shocked that in his first 2 years at Geelong, Tim Kelly kicked 24 total goals in each season. So he was a much bigger goal kicker than I thought. And it's no surprise that the most goals he's kicked at West Coast in a single season was 10. And that was in that 2023 season. So I'm sure a lot of West Coast supporters weren't happy with what Tim Kelly was saying, that he'd fallen out of love of the game. But I did like that he was at least honest. From afar, you could probably tell he was not as invested. Although his numbers and performances had been relatively good, Kelly's never been the fittest player. He always looks like he's carrying an extra few kilograms. Definitely not as fit as he was at Geelong. And when you're getting paid $800,000 and you say that you don't have passion, I think people can be maybe a little bit upset, a little bit envious, especially when West Coast members pay a lot of money for their memberships. But overall, the trade, has it been a fail? Sure it has. Has Kelly been as good as they wanted him to be? I don't think so. Has he been deplorable? No. So I think two things can be true. It's mainly to do with the list management. They mucked it up. They spent way too much for him. And then the rest of the pieces around him obviously haven't been very good. And now they sit where they are. I still think he can have an impact. He's over 30 now. He's one of their senior players. So maybe Andrew McCalder can spark him back into action. And he can have, a bit better year than he did last year. Now, obviously, Harley Reid from West Coast was one of the most hyped number one draft picks we've ever seen for good reason. But I don't think we've heard as much about Sam Lalor. Been pretty quiet this preseason. Although in the little snippets I've seen, he looks very big, very powerful. For an 18-year-old, it's pretty remarkable. Now, Sam Lalor as a pick is the classic all upside. If you go back just a couple comparisons, Patrick Dangerfield and I think Marcus Bonampelli, not that he's a similar player to them, but similar in their draft years. Both Dangerfield and Bonampelli didn't put up great under 18 numbers. When you looked at them, they didn't look physically, that dominant or potential A-grade players like they've turned out to. And I think that it's the same with Sam Lalor. He's the classic all upside, high potential number one pick, and I like it. He didn't put up great under 18 numbers at all. He was injured a lot of the year and did have to play forward quite a bit. So that's why I think it was a little bit of a surprise that he shot up the draft boards as quick as he did. Because if you just look from a numbers perspective, it's far from other guys we've seen taken number one like Sam Walsh, Nick Dacos, Matt Rowell, who were putting up monster stats. Lawler's not like that. So what can we expect from him? Well, I'm not too sure, but I think it'll be mainly bursts of talent here and there. And I'm not sure he'll be ultra consistent. Adamuse did an interview with AFL.com and said that he never actually done a pre-season before. Again, it's all part of that all upside potential that he has. Because he was such a good cricketer, his off-seasons were mainly focused heavily on cricket. So obviously he didn't do AFL pre-seasons, doing the running and getting his fitness up. Because of that, I think he's done majority of the pre-season. I'm not sure we can expect him to be as good as Harley Reid was last year. But I think if he can play mostly forward and midfield, which Adamuse said he would, if he can produce a little moments of spectacular play here and there, that's all you really need. I think Lalor might be a little bit of a slow burn, like most of those power athletes are, but it might take even a touch longer. Because he's never done a pre-season before. I'm not sure what his fitness base is, but he's still pretty raw as a player. But I do like these type of guys getting taken high up in the draft board. Instead of taking those regular midfielders who get 25 disposals, 30 disposals in their under 18 years and the national champs. Take a guy who has a lot of upside, like a Bonampelli and Dangerfield, and you might be able to get something good out of them. And we'll see how Sam Lalor goes in his first season. Thanks for watching the Sporting Eyes show for the 17th of February. We've got a bunch of practice games this week coming up, which I can't wait to have a look at some of them. And I'll see you guys on Thursday.